Hello everyone, welcome to Professional Training Academy, your own learning center. In today's video, we are going to talk about user story mapping. We will try and we'll learn how do we create epics and user stories for the project. For the first time, when we are defining the epics and user stories for the project, for the work that we are going to do, what is the standard approach? What is an approach that we should take? How do we create the epic and user stories? How do we map them and make sure that epic and user stories are properly defined, and it also covers the scope of the project. So we will spend some time to understand how do we do it, right? Before moving further, this is a sample, you can say a sample screen or sample image of epics and user stories. Epics are also called as activities, right? The high level activities as part of the project. And then how are we going to cover these activities in the development, which are mostly user stories. So one epic is mapped to different user stories that you see, right? In this video, we will try and learn that how do we agree, how do we define and create a mapping like this, right? The first and the foremost thing is to start with the initial story mapping activity, right? Initial story mapping activity is the first step or the first attempt when we are creating the user story mapping document or the user story mapping image. Many times in an agile environment, we do it along with the entire team, right? Using post-it notes in the agile room, using a dashboard, very similar to what you see on the image. This is how we try and define. While doing the initial story mapping, there are certain points that we need to remember and also follow, right? The most important thing is the workflow, understanding of the workflow and convey the message, convey the workflow is very, very important. The project has multiple activities to take place. We need to first define and convey the workflow. And these workflow would ideally be the epics or the activities that will help you to divide a big entire workflow into a couple of steps, 5, 6, 7. These are your effective epic, right? Then once the activity or the epic is defined, a quick review on the activity is also important, right? We need to make sure that there are no gaps on the business context, right? At least the entire workflow is correct. The business context is clear to everyone, right? Then it is ideal scenario that we have the stakeholders also when we are trying to develop the requirements, right? We have to develop the requirements in the terms of defining the user stories, defining the steps by working closely with all the stakeholders. The activity is mostly advised to be do it together with all the team, with the subject matter experts on the processes, on the domain. If there are more subject matter experts, it is advisable that when we are trying to break the epic and user story, we take help of each subject matter expert and we do the activity together, right? We write them, we break the stories or the epic together so that we make sure that the mapping of the stories are appropriate. Now, very, very important, when you have defined the epic and when you are trying and breaking that epic, there will be different subject matter experts, main subject matter expert, technology subject matter expert, right? Along with understanding of the workflow from the stakeholder. So if not everyone is available at the same time in the meeting, it is advisable that we have these preconditions met when we are writing the initial story map. We need to make sure that we have the team with us while doing it, right? And when we are defining it, the best way is to use the post-it, which is what is mentioned. There can be different tools. It's not necessarily that you are defining in a board within the office using post-it to define the draft version of the epic and user story. There are different tools also available, whatever is the way that organization is using. But here, using post-it and defining it in the board where everybody can view, right, and we make changes, it gives a clear picture. It is coming into a shape. The edit, update, right, finalization of the draft version is very, very helpful in such scenario. That is why when we are doing it, trying and creating it for the first time, when we are defining the entire scope of the project, this is an ideal approach to take to come to the stage where we have a good draft version of epic and user story is ready. Right? This is your first step. It can also take a couple of hours when you have entire team, when you discuss on the requirement, you define the workflow, it may take a couple of hours to reach to this level. Once the initial story map document is ready, initial story mapping is ready, you have epic and user stories, draft version is defined. The next important activity that we have to do is to make sure that the story mapping is now working. Working means that the next level story mapping. So initial draft version is ready. Now we will review it, we will update it, we make sure that the epic and user stories mapping is now ready for us to use, right? And how do we do it? We have to make sure from initial story mapping to working story mapping, the working story mapping is ready, right? In the initial one, when we define the epic and user stories, there is a lot of activities in terms of epic and user stories are already defined. So we have an understanding of what is the activity and what is the task. Eventually, what is the epic and the different user stories related to that epic. We have tried and broken the epic into user stories, right? Now, when this is done, we will see that if there are certain group activities within the task, those are the stories, right? If there is a dependency between different stories, or there are a couple of stories which can be done together, this level of review, we have to do it on the draft version that we have created. Why do we do it? It helps in understanding and defining the project goals, the sprints well. It establishes a relationship between different stories. It helps them in doing the prioritization of the story. It helps in identifying the dependencies on different stories. Right? There can be a dependency. For example, story 2 cannot be completed unless story 1 is ready, right? Or story 1 and 2 are the activities that can be done together, right? Simultaneously. So such level of task level, which is the story level identification, is very, very important. We have to identify it. It's a thorough review of the initial draft that has been created by the team, right? Find out if there are different gaps in the stories. While defining the initial story mapping, while breaking the epic into user stories, we might have missed something. And when we are doing the review, we are doing a thorough review, right? We are using the different user persona and scenarios to make sure that there are, if the story gaps in requirements are not there, some of the tasks are not missing, some of the tasks or the user stories are not properly broken it down, right? All these activities we have to do, right? Then once these things are done, it is very important for us to identify the important items, prioritize them, right? There will be, as a result of this thorough review, there will be certain item that we might not do. It's a low priority item, right? So it helps in not only identifying the priority item, but also identify that what and how are we going to do it, to set up on the sprint, to have the high level product backlog items prioritization, right? And then one decision we map into different iteration, like different sprint. We try and map stories. We have now at least stories ready for the coming few sprints, right? That is what is the, then only the sprint will begin when we have the stories. And then as part of our sprint activity, we can take those stories, we estimate it, we refine it, and we start our sprint, right? So with this, your working story map, the epic to user story mapping, which is now ready for the work to start, right? And then the next and the final step is, which is a continuous activity, is the revision and updation on your epic and user story mapping. Requirements in agile environment will keep on changing, right? The prioritization keeps on changing. So we have to make sure that when your epic and user story mapping is created, right? And whatever tool that you are using, you have created all the epic and user story in the Jira, or you are managing via Excel sheet or some other tool, when entire project along with epic and user story is already created, we will keep on revisiting the story map or the project to make sure that whatever changes that we have to do, we continuously do the revision and updation whenever required, right? And it is also advisable that once your working story map is ready, we do a quick review with our stakeholders and client representative also, to make sure if there are anything that has to be considered, right? Let me go to that slide. Yeah. And then whenever we are doing some changes, right, tracking the changes in the form of sprint reviews and all that is very, very important. So that will keep on happening even after working epic user story mapping is ready and you have used everything on the project. You may not need to come back on the initial or the working mapping that we have created in an agile board or using some application. You can again track it via epic and user story that has been created on Jira. Any change, we create it and then accordingly include it in as a product backlog item in the backlog. Then the prioritization, estimation, and all these activity will be done. Yeah, the only thing that ideally we should do is to keep a track of the requirement, right? That is getting changes and updated, so that we make sure that we have all the updates available, right? And whenever an information is required, we can always identify that what is the level of information that has been changed, right? There should not be a drastic change on a lot of requirements, but we have to make sure that we are managing them well, right? This is an important, at the beginning of the video, we have discussed on the mapping activity, right? It helps when you're doing it for the first time for the project, right? Along with your subject matter expert and the team, such level of activity, creating the high level will definitely help to create the initial level story mapping, and then you continuously work and define it, right? So this is some quick help when you are doing the epic to user story mapping. Right? Feel free to reach out to us on the given number and the email ID and the contact to know more about Agile program. There are specific Agile project help and support that we do. Feel free to reach out to us. Thank you very much.